people out there, like I do tonight, I'm kind of reminded of a story my mother used to tell on herself. She was 10 years old, and she just learned how to play the guitar, so she signed up to sing the special for the Sunday night service. And when the car rolled into the church parking lot on Sunday night, she looked out and saw all the cars, and she said to her sister Violet, she says, "Look, Violet, all those people came to hear me sing." Violet says, "Don't be ridiculous. Some of those people didn't come to hear you sing. They're going to be here whether you sang or not." And then my mother says, "Yeah, but just think. They knew I was going to sing, and they didn't stay home." So my name was in the bulletin. You knew I was going to be here, and you didn't stay home. That's good. Well, you can see the title of the message tonight is Stay on the Wall. We're going to be talking about Nehemiah's wall. And Nehemiah is in the Old Testament. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, if you want to look for it. But at any rate, I love the story of the new coach. The new coach, you know, there was a small college team, and they lost every game for 3 straight years. And you know what happens when the coach loses a bunch of games? They fire him and they bring in a new guy. So they brought in the new coach, and he had a meeting with his assistants, and he says, "Now, gentlemen, I've been doing some scouting. I saw this one kid, game started, and he got knocked down, and man, he was really slow getting up, and he got knocked down again, and he was done. He had to limp off the field. We want him on our team?" The coach says, "No, we don't want him." The coach said, "Then I saw another kid. He got knocked down. He got right back up. He got knocked down again. He got up again, but it took him about 3 times, and he was done too. The coach had to pull him out and say on the bench, 'We want him on our team?' And they said, 'No, we don't want him.' The coach said, 'Then I saw this kid. He got knocked down. He put a smile on his face, got right back up there in the line. He got knocked down again. It didn't matter how many times this kid got knocked down. He always had a smile on his face and got right back where he was going to be. And the coach says, 'Is that who we want on our team?' The assistant says, 'Yeah, we want him. Get him.' The coach says, 'No, we don't want him. We want a guy on the other team that keeps knocking everybody down.'" Well, stay on the wall. I'm going to be talking to you 3 things about Nehemiah's wall. Thing number 1 is, why do you want to get on the wall? Thing number 2 is, what happens if you get on the wall and you come down from the wall? And point number 3 is, what happens if you get on the wall and you stay on the wall? First of all, though, I need to explain what I'm talking to you about, the wall. Nehemiah built a brick and mortar wall. But when I talk to you about a wall, staying on the wall and getting on the wall, I'm talking to you about God's plan for your life. You see, I believe that God has a unique plan for you, for your life. I believe He has a unique plan for me. And so that is the wall I'm going to be talking about. We'll be in Nehemiah chapter 1 to start with. Nehemiah chapter 1, I'm going to be reading out of the King James Bible. That's what I grew up with. I'm used to that. I always figured if the King James Bible was good enough for the Apostle Paul, it's good enough for me. You know what I mean? Anyway, Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 3. "And they said unto me," that's Nehemiah, "said unto me, the remnant that are left in the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire." So the wall around Jerusalem was in bad shape. Then we're going to go to chapter 2 and read verses 1 through 5. "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been beforetime sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid. And the king said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said unto the king, If it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldst send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. When I was a little kid, growing up and going to church and Sunday school, Summersville Missionary Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, Illinois. I learned about Nehemiah. I learned two things about Nehemiah. I learned that he was the cupbearer for the king, and I learned that he rebuilt the wall of Jerusalem. First, I'm going to just briefly address this cupbearer business. Because when I was a kid, I learned that he was the cupbearer of the king. And I had in my mind what a cupbearer was. I thought, well, 4 or 5 times a day, Nehemiah is going to put on his best robe and go back to the back room of the castle, and he's going to get this golden goblet and fill it full of nectar and very ceremoniously present it to the king. And the king would take it and he would drink the nectar or wine or whatever he was drinking. Nehemiah would take it, put it back in the back room, and prepare for the next time. Well, I'm sure Nehemiah did plenty of that. He did that. But there's a little more to it than that. Let's say that you wanted to become king. How would you do it? Well, there are 2 ways to become king. Method number 1 is you're born the firstborn son of the king. And if that's the case, then when the king dies, you're king. Method number 2 is also simple. You simply kill the king and his family and take over. As it turns out, one very efficient way of killing the king was to poison his food or to poison his drink. And that's where the cupbearer, that's where Nehemiah comes in. Nehemiah's job was to make sure that the king's food was safe. And it usually involved he had to eat some of it or drink some of the whatever the king was drinking. And so you see, if the food had been poisoned, Nehemiah would die and not the king. Now, if you think about it, who in their right mind would want that job? Not me. I don't want that job. Well, as it turns out, it's a very prestigious job. Everybody wanted that job for some reason. I wonder why. I mean, if you eat the food and you die, that's no good. Well, it's very prestigious because you had constant access to the king. The cupbearer did. Now, if you're a regular person, like me or you, and you wanted to talk to the king, you might as well forget it. You can't get in to talk to the king. It was very difficult to talk to the king, and even if you did, you didn't get to talk very long, and you were out of there. So Nehemiah was there all the time, and so he knew the king, and the king knew him. So in chapter 2 here, we see that the king noticed something about Nehemiah. He noticed, you're sad. What's going on? I know you're not sick. Something is going on. So Nehemiah told him what was going on and gave him permission to go over and rebuild the wall. Now Nehemiah was so upset about this, he thought, I have to go up there and rebuild this wall. I have to do this. He didn't have to have that response, though. When he heard about the wall being in bad shape, he could have said, that's really bad. I'm sorry about that. It's my hometown and everything. But I'm the cupbearer for the king. I got to stay here. I can't be going back to Jerusalem building the wall. I got to do my job here. Or he could have said, that's a really shame. I think I'll sign up for the $10 a month plan. Or he could have said, I know what I'll do. I'll show the world how much I care, and I'll change my Facebook profile. But he didn't do those things. He said, I must go back and build this wall. In the early 1970s, there was a young man named Van Phillips. And Van Phillips was going to college on a tennis scholarship. And he liked to play tennis, of course, but he liked to do a lot of other things, and among them water skiing. You ever water skiing? I did a couple of times. It's fun. I never was very good at it, but it turns out it doesn't matter if you're good or if you're bad. The same thing always happens. You always wipe out. And when you wipe out, the procedure is the boat swings back around and gets you the rope, and you grab hold of it again, and he guns the engine, and off you go again. Well, Van Phillips wiped out. But something happened. He got tangled up in the rope or something, and when the boat came around to give him the rope, the boat cut his foot off. Of course, that ended his college career in tennis. It almost ended his life. But they got him to the hospital one time, and after 2 or 3 months of recuperation, came time for him to be fitted for his prosthetic foot. And that in those days, a prosthetic foot was simply a block of wood was shaped kind of like a foot, and they strapped it on him. But the nurses said, now, Mr. Phillips, we have to tell you, this is really hard to figure out how to do this, so we need to help you out. We need to walk with you. And he says, nothing doing. I've been a college athlete. I can do this. You stand over there and you just watch me. So he stood over there, and Van Phillips sat on his bed, stood up, he took one step and fell flat on his face. But he was undeterred, so he sat on the bed again, stood up again, took one step, and again fell flat on his face. And it didn't matter how many times that he tried to get up and walk, he would always fall down. And he got very discouraged. And he got mad, and he sat on the bed, and he ripped that thing off of there, and he threw it against the wall, and he went to bed, and he says, why doesn't somebody do something? Somebody has to invent something that works better than this thing. It's no good. He faced the wall, and he entered into a very deep depression. And his friends would come, his family would come to try to cheer him up, but he always said the same thing. Why doesn't somebody do something? Somebody's got to invent something better, because this stupid thing you gave me doesn't work. He did that for several weeks, but finally, one day, he realized nobody's ever going to fix it. Nobody's ever going to invent anything better. It's always going to be this way. I must do something. I have to do this. So he enrolled in medical school, started studying the human foot. He learned everything he could about it. He tried to build a new foot. But he came to the conclusion that what they had given him was about as good as it's going to get. But he didn't give up. He turned around completely, and instead of studying the human foot, he started studying cats. The foot and the leg of the cat. You know how cats are. They can be sitting right here and see something over there, bounce, and they'll bounce 5 or 6 feet, just one spring. So he came up with a very unique design, and it looks like a metal pole with a curved piece of metal on it. He called it the Blade Runner. Have you ever seen these Blade Runners? I've seen those things, and they work. They work well. There's some kid over at Carl Junction that has one of these. And I think he's a 5th grader, it might be 6th, but I saw him last Thursday, and when I had my kids over there for library after school, and this kid with the Blade Runner, he's an African-American kid, but he was doing what 5th and 6th grade boys love to do. They like to jump up and touch the door frame. Some of them can do it, some of them can't. He was having no problems whatsoever. Not only could he jump up and touch it, he was just seeing how high he could get up there. And I understand this kid plays football. I was talking to a guy I know whose son is on this kid's football team. And he says, oh yeah, that guy with the Blade Runner, he plays quarterback. He's the best player on the team. Nobody can keep up with him. He said, matter of fact, in the first game that we had, almost the first play, this kid got loose and scored a touchdown. All because Van Phillips stopped saying, why doesn't somebody do something, and said, I must do something. See, that's what Nehemiah did. He could have said, why doesn't somebody do something? He said, I must do something. I must get on the wall. So why should you get on the wall? Well, Van Phillips had the intelligence, and he certainly had the motivation to invent something brand new. Nehemiah obviously had some kind of leadership experience, leadership qualities, and probably some construction knowledge. But see, whenever God gives you a job, He's going to give you whatever you need to do that job. So that's why you should get on the wall. Now we're going to go to Nehemiah chapter 6. Yeah, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. And at this point, Nehemiah is over there working on the wall. 1 through 4. And it came to pass, when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian and the rest of our enemies heard that I had builded the wall, and that there was no breach left therein, though at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, Come, let us meet together in some one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me mischief. And I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease, whilst I leave it, and come down to you? Yet they said unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered in the same manner. You see, Nehemiah stayed on the wall. What was going to happen to Nehemiah if he came down from the wall? If he stopped doing the Lord's work and came down from the wall, it says they were going to do him mischief. Maybe in some other translations it might say something else, but at the very least they were going to beat him up. Maybe they were going to kill him. Maybe they were going to take him hostage and demand a big ransom from the King Artaxerxes. But whatever, harm was going to come to him. Now in our society, if you are doing the Lord's work and you stop doing the Lord's work, are you going to get beat up? Are you going to get killed? Are you going to get taken hostage? No. None of those things. As a matter of fact, sometimes you might even be celebrated, unfortunately. That's not going to happen to you, but some things do happen. The main thing that seems to happen to people when they stop doing things, and sometimes people don't even know that they've come down from the wall, it's a word called compromise. When I was in school, I was taught that compromise was a good thing. You know, we sent these people to Washington and they get together and they compromise and come up with solutions to problems. Well, compromise can be good. It's often good. You can compromise on what you're going to eat, where you're going to eat, where you live, what church you go to. All kinds of things you can compromise on. But some things you can't. And you might not even realize that you've compromised on it. Well, for instance, let's just say that I'm sitting in my living room watching TV or reading a book, eating cookies or something like that. All right, I'm eating cookies. Sitting there eating cookies in my living room. And that's true. I eat too many cookies. I just eat too many cookies. But at any rate, I hear a bunch of commotion going on in my driveway. So I go out there and look, and there's a couple of guys trying to steal my truck. And I can't have that, so I went out there and we get in a big argument, and we argue for 15 or 20 minutes, and I come into the house, and my wife says, what's going on out there? I said, well, these 2 old boys are trying to steal my truck. She says, that's not good. I said, yeah, but it worked out okay. We came to a compromise. She says, how's that work? I said, well, they're not going to steal my truck. They're only going to take 4 tires and my catalytic converter. How crazy is that? That just doesn't make any sense at all. It turns out you can't compromise with thou shalt not steal. I mean, you can't steal anything. It doesn't matter if it's somebody's truck or a catalytic converter or that little candy bar at Walmart. It doesn't make any difference. It's wrong. You can't compromise with that. Another thing you can't compromise in is thou shalt not commit murder. And in my mind, that also includes abortion. You just cannot commit murder. Period. That's all there is. But sometimes people compromise and they don't even know they're compromising. Let's say that you get in a discussion with somebody and you're discussing how to get to heaven. And they say, well, what about all those hundreds of millions of Muslims? Aren't they, some of them going to heaven? Well, the answer is John 14, chapter 14, verse 6 says, I, that's Jesus, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. So, those Muslims, if they go through Jesus, yeah, they're going to make it. But if not, sorry, they're not going to do it. Not going to get there. Same when it goes with the Hindus and the Buddhists and everybody else, all these other religions I don't know anything about. If they don't go through Jesus, they can't get to God. Jesus said that. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But you say, there's a guy that lives just down the road from me. He doesn't go to church, but he says he's going to make it to heaven because he's a good guy. And he is. He's one of the most morally upright individuals I've ever met. He is very generous with his time, generous with his money. And he'll help you out. He'll give you the shirt off his back. What about him? He's surely going to make it to heaven, isn't he? John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. If he doesn't go through Jesus, he's not in. So you can't compromise on that. And sometimes you can be discussing this with people and you think, well, I don't know, maybe you will, I don't know. Well, sorry, you can't compromise on Jesus. That's just the way it is. I heard about a preacher one time. He compromised. Didn't work out very well for him. He'd been preaching a while. He said, I've had it. I'm going to call in sick, take a walk in the woods. So he called in sick, and he didn't dare go to town. Somebody see him. So he went out in the woods. He started walking out in the woods, and deep into the forest, and he heard something behind him. He looked back there, and grrr, big old grizzly bear was back there. So he thought, I'm going to have to get out of here. So he started walking faster and faster, and the bear kept following him. Pretty soon he found himself boxed in. There was a wall over here, and a cliff over here, and a cliff right in front of him, and back there was the bear. So he said, oh no, I better pray. He said, oh Lord, I know I missed church today, but please make this bear a Christian. As soon as he said that, that bear dropped to his knees, looked to the heavens, folded his paws, and says, thank you, Lord, for this food I'm about to receive. So don't come down from the wall. Now what happens if you... Pretty crazy, huh? What happens if you stay on the wall? I mean, okay. You know what it means when a preacher looks at his watch? Absolutely nothing. But I'm not really a preacher. I've got to plan out what I'm going to say, so when I'm done, I'm done. So what happens if you stay on the wall? Is it all sunshine and blue skies and green lights and bed of roses? Well, maybe. But often it's not. You see, with Nehemiah, he stayed on the wall, and these people kept pestering him. It says 4 times they came back, try to get him down. Go to the plain of Ono and talk this over. So Nehemiah said, oh no, I'm not going to Ono. So if you stay on the wall, you're going to have people that are trying to distract you, trying to get you to stop. I remember last summer, you may remember this too, there were 4 professional baseball players. I think it was 4, might have been 5, but I believe it was 4 professional baseball players who played for Tampa Bay, I believe. It might have been Atlanta, but I believe it was Tampa Bay. But June is Gay Pride Month. Now, I don't know how that happened. I don't remember voting on that. I don't remember my congressman voting on that. But for some reason, June is Gay Pride Month. I don't know how that happened. But this baseball team, I believe it was Tampa Bay, decided we're going to honor these people and show them we support them. We're going to put a rainbow patch on our uniforms to show our support for them. Well, these 4 guys went to management and said, we're Christians. We really can't support that. We really can't wear that patch because we believe God loves everybody. We want everybody to feel welcome. But if we put that patch on our uniform, that's going to tell the whole world that we support something that God condemns. And so we can't do that. Well, you would have thought those guys were axe murderers or something. You might have seen it on the talking heads in some of these talk shows on the television. My goodness, they called those guys every name in the book. And they drug their name through the mud. So these guys stayed on the wall, but they kind of paid a pretty good price for it. Now I'm going to tell you a story that, it's a true story because I heard a youth pastor from the Little Rock area. The guy's name is Carl. And he lived in the Little Rock area while Carl was doing his thing, and he had actually interacted with Carl on several occasions. Now, every town has a Carl. I don't know who it is in West City, but sometimes it's a lady, and she has a grocery cart or something, and they call her the bag lady, and they push things around. Or there's a guy. And a lot of times they're mentally ill or something. Maybe they ride a bicycle and they have a little basket up there. Everybody knows them, and they sort of treat them like a pet almost. And Carl was that, except he wasn't mentally ill. He was just not smart. It was special ed all the way through school, and I don't know if he even made it through school, but when he was out and finished with school, he was not smart enough to even hold down a job. But he had to do something, so he took up walking, and he just walked. He'd get up and eat breakfast, and he'd start walking. And he wasn't going anywhere. He was just walking. And it became kind of a rite of passage for all the kids in the town to give Carl a ride. And you hadn't made it through your teenage years successfully unless you gave Carl a ride. You'd see Carl walking down the road, and you'd stop the car and say, "Hey, Carl, get in, we'll give you a ride." And Carl would get in there, and they'd drive down a little ways, and then they'd drop him off. And it didn't matter where they dropped him off because he wasn't going anywhere. He was just walking. Well, there's something I did not tell you yet about Carl. See, when Carl was a teenager, he was not smart at all, but he was smart enough when he went to church. He realized that he was a sinner and needed a Savior. So Carl, as a teenager, accepted Jesus. And whenever he did, he said, "Wow, this is great. I'm forgiven of my sins. I have Jesus. Everybody needs Jesus." So when Carl got into the car, he'd immediately start telling these kids about Jesus. And they'd drop him off somewhere else, and he'd walk some more, and another car would come by. "Hey, Carl, get in, we'll give you a ride." And Carl would get in there, and he'd start talking to them about Jesus. And this went on for several years. And there's no telling how many hundreds, probably thousands of people that Carl told about Jesus. And remember, he was not very smart. He probably didn't even know John 3:16. But that's what he did. Well, one day, Carl disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. He was gone for about 2 weeks, and then he showed up again, walked around again just like nothing had happened. And he was getting rides and telling the kids about Jesus. Finally, somebody asked me, "Carl, where have you been?" He said, "Well, I've been to Los Angeles." And they thought, "Los Angeles? How's that work?" Well, it happened again. He disappeared and was gone for a week or so. And he came back, and it was as if he was never gone anywhere. He walked around, kids gave him rides, and somebody said, "Carl, where have you been?" He said, "Well, I was in Seattle." I thought, "Carl, you're not even smart enough to know there is a Seattle. How would you get there? That doesn't make any sense." And this pattern developed. He'd be home for a month or two, and then he'd be gone for a week or so. And they asked him, "Where have you been, Carl?" And he'd always say, "Oh, I was in Miami," or "I've been to San Francisco," or "I went to Boston," or "I went to Minneapolis." And nobody could figure it out until one day somebody saw Carl at the local truck stop. And they watched as Carl got into the truck with the truck driver, and they realized what was going on. You see, God had entrusted Carl with this wall of witnessing to all these kids. But now God had given him an even bigger wall, and he was getting into the cab with these truck drivers, and he'd tell them about Jesus. And then they'd drop him off at another truck stop, and he'd get another ride, and he'd get in there, and he'd tell these truck drivers about Jesus. And there's no telling how many hundreds of truck drivers that Carl told about Jesus. Well, one day Carl got sick, and he died. And the preacher at his church decided, well, I guess we'll have a funeral for him because he's been a good, faithful servant. But he only has his mother, and she's a recluse. Nobody even knows her. Probably nobody will be here. So they put it in the bulletin, funeral services for Carl at 2 o'clock on Saturday. Well, Saturday came around, and about 2 hours before this funeral was supposed to start, people started showing up. And they filed past Carl's casket, and they gazed upon the face of the person who had told them about Jesus. And the line kept going and kept going. For several hours, it never ended. The line going by to pay Carl his last respects. And then somebody came out of the church, and he pointed across the road and he said, "Look." And there was a semi-tractor trailer parked over there. And behind that, another big rig. And behind that, another big rig. And for several blocks around, there was nothing but semi-tractor trailer trucks parked there. Because apparently these guys had got on their CBs and said, "Hey, Carl's having a service Saturday." You see, no telling how many people Carl had witnessed